Thanks, Perianne. Thanks to Chamber of Digital Commerce. I think this is a great venue for the best and the brightest to get together across many disciplines to kind of really understand and kind of convey what's the message of blockchain? What's the message of distributed ledger technologies? How does it impact industry? How does it impact business? How does it impact government? How does it impact nations? And I think this is a unique venue and a unique opportunity for everyone to get together and collaborate and really start addressing some of these questions. So, breaking barriers to blockchain adoption, getting to planet scale trust. As part of the closing ceremonies last year, I ended, on this slide. How do we get to planet scale trust? How do we get different industries, different economies on blockchain technology? And there's going to be a variety of blockchain technologies that exist. We know this. How do we drive interoperability? How do we ensure consistency and assurance of trust across industry, government, and everything in between? And one of the things that we kind of have been going on the journey is how do we actually make this happen? I mean, it's one thing to put it on a slide and say it's great, but how do we actually enable ourselves? How do we enable our businesses? How do we enable the countries that we live in to kind of make this actually happen? And so one of the things that a use case that I walked through last year was, a use case around pharmaceutical, the delivery of pharmaceutical drugs, by drones, triggered by a prescription refill order, initiating an action to a pharmacy, potentially a hospital, cross-validation of that prescription by the doctor, the pharmacist, enacting and enabling a drone to fly off and deliver that to a patient. There's many ecosystems that are involved here, and given that it's a healthcare kind of use case, obviously there's a regulatory implication. Given that there's airspace, there's a regulatory implication. So what's actually needed? How do we actually deliver a vision like this? And you may debate as to whether or not this is a fanciful use case, but the idea that you need to bring these different ecosystems together in a cohesive manner is the challenge and is the journey that's ahead of us. Now, since then, since last year, we've seen some amazing, interesting times, right? We've seen all kinds of press announcements, good or bad. We've seen a lot of good press, negative press. We're seeing a lot of activity on the negative side of this industry. If anyone sees this email address pop up in your journeys, please call your local authorities. Crypto phishing is the latest thing. This is being driven by advanced persistent threats across the crypto community. Some of the research that we've been showing and we've been doing has shown and proved that you can actually compromise end-to-end crypto ecosystems, compromise the infrastructure, and the problem starts to manifest. So one of the things that we've been doing is trying to understand what is the implication of infrastructure on these new value networks, these value economies, and how do we better defend against these? So part of what we're doing is actually looking at what's the different security technology from the infrastructure that we can actually enable at the application and at the business layer of these value environments. And we've seen some really interesting work around, adding blockchain to your product, and all of a sudden your stock value has tripled or gone up in price. I think those days are over, though, in general. I think people have started to see through that. But that said, I think there is still value that people are perceiving of, if they introduce blockchain into their business, now there's something more to it than what it may actually be. And of course, CryptoKitties. Everyone needs a CryptoKitty. And while CryptoKitty, I think in general, has been fairly positively viewed, the one thing that I find most compelling about CryptoKitties is that for the first time in the blockchain space, it was easy to understand what blockchain was about. With the latest mobile adaptations of CryptoKitties, blockchain has become a mobily accessible thing, right? So it's one thing to buy and trade and breed CryptoKitties. It's another thing to really affect the user experience in and around blockchain. And I think that's where a lot of the work that we're seeing is really starting to pick up. And these numbers are probably outdated, but clearly there's a lot of value that's been driven into CryptoKitties. And on the enterprise side, we're seeing a lot of traction pick up, right? Over the last 18 months, we're seeing more and more enterprise customers trying to really understand what is blockchain, how does that actually impact their business, how does it impact their go-to-market, how does it impact the customers that they sell to, the partners that they sell through, and how does it affect their broader ecosystem. And we're seeing more investment happen in this space, okay? This is exciting. I mean, now we're starting to see, industries that are not so digital, not so advanced, still heavily paper-based in their workflows, start to take notice of blockchain. They're starting a digitization journey. And as they're doing that, they're also being introduced to blockchain. So it's a unique opportunity. And so what's driving this? It's a recognition that there are a lot of complexities and hidden cost factors in enterprises today. There's challenges around transparency. Every enterprise that we've spoken to as customers, as partners, they're all trying to get after one thing. How do they get more transparency into their ecosystem? And this is a tried and true message in the blockchain space. But the fact that we're seeing more people, more customers, more companies, enterprises try to get to this, that's compelling. We're seeing a lot of complexity in how businesses do, how they interact with one another. And of course, how do we drive simplicity, right? And so a lot of these enterprises are recognizing that the function and the processes that they have in place are highly complicated. Is there a better way to get to where they need to get to? And of course, security. We all want to be able to prove and say that we're running secure businesses, secure operations, secure IT, secure IoT. But there's some challenges there still, right? And so how do we help our customers? How do we help each other kind of build more complete end-to-end secure environments? And in doing so, we end up actually securing the end-to-end value chain, right? Which is what it's all about. How you take products from one end of the value chain to the other in a secure, ethical fashion. And so we're also seeing the emergence of machines, right? The machine economy is on its way. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. And what's interesting at this intersection of the machines now getting involved in transactions is you create an environment where multiple industries can interact with one another. And as they interact with one another, they're creating new assets of value, right? They're actually able to create new value just through the interaction between the industries. And so this is a representative of the kinds of industries that might be involved, from the people who are providing the capabilities to the consumers and everything in between. The opportunity here is that creating complete trust layers between these different segments, I think is a massive value proposition that we don't really truly understand just how big it's going to be yet. But this is going to be exciting. And so this is being driven and will have to be driven by recognizing that we need more advanced security paradigms. Right? We need to move to trustless security environments. We need to move to perimeterless security environments, environments where the infrastructure, the applications are continually interrogating itself to ensure that, is the environment actually clean? We need to drive this from an end-to-end ecosystem perspective, not just from the core and in the cloud, but down to the last 3 inches into devices, into handsets, into sensors, into actuators. And we need to be able to do this at scale. Now, there's been a lot of press lately about supply chain. Supply chain is probably the next hottest topic in the blockchain space, certainly from an enterprise perspective. And so at Cisco, we've been looking at this fairly intently. And how do we actually, what is the business of Cisco's supply chain, right? What is the motivating factor around this? And so as we kind of looked at this journey, and we've been on this journey for about 2 years now, we said, let's actually understand, right? Cisco supply chain is global in footprint, 13 countries, 25 locations. There are literally thousands of teams that actually participate in the manufacture of goods that we deliver to our customers. We have 30,000 orderable items, 65,000 components. Every kind of component that you would expect to find in a network infrastructure provider, from a Cisco perspective, that comes and that comes from a third party. And of course, the diversity of the kinds of end products that these different components are converted into is, it's the portfolio. It's the entire portfolio, right? And so we said, is this an environment where we could actually apply blockchain? Is this an environment where we could say, can we prove value? And so as we started the journey, we said, okay, what are we getting ourselves into? What we did not realize as the blockchain team is that Cisco is ranked number 3 in the world for supply chain efficiency. So as we started this, we were scratching our heads and saying, how do we prove value in an environment where we're already hyper efficient, right? Quick fact, 80% of what we sell, we never touch. Of the assets that we do touch, we have them in hand for no more than 8 days. We do not manage inventory. We do not, warehouse equipment. Everything is built to order. We've pushed risk and cost as far out to the edge as possible. So how do you prove value in an environment where you're already hyper efficient? Going through the journey, building out some technology, getting it deployed, working with partners globally, to taking blockchain technology, embedding it into IT systems, embedding it into OT systems around the world, we're happy to say that in less than 2 years, we're able to start generating an ROI, right? But let's expand on this a little for a second. How we turn dirt into revenues. And literally, we're turning dirt into revenues. Raw materials from mines converted into sub-assemblies, components, those components packaged into end products, those products then delivered to customers. Cisco is already a circular economy company. We bring products back in, we recycle them, we refurbish them, send them back out, right? We do this at a global scale. And what's very interesting is that as we've been going through this journey, we've been identifying what's the best practices and how you actually operationalize blockchain technology at a global scale. How do you manage complex data models? How do you operate in an environment where access to data is sometimes spotty, it's incomplete, sometimes it's got errors in it? And remember, our supply chain organization is recognized by the industry as running one of the most efficient. So how do we do this when we still have these kinds of data and data integrity problems? And more complexing, how do we do this at scale? So I mentioned ROI. The ROI that we are calculating for ourselves in the very first use cases that we deployed is we're actually able to now seize gray market and counterfeit products before they get to our customers, and to do that in less than 2 years. From first line of code to production deployment to the first seizures at customs. You notice in this picture, a lot of these boxes, there's literally tens of millions of products, tens of millions of dollars worth of product in here. The counterfeiters have gone to the extent of even copying the DHL labels, right? They're actually printing their own tape, right, to kind of drive and trying to fool people that this is actually a legitimate shipment, right? But it's not. And we've empowered and enabled our partners in this space to kind of help us, help them, help our customers to make sure that these products are not getting to customers. And what's evolving in this space is the requirements. I think we're on a journey where, from a product manager's perspective, we can honestly say that in this space, we will never be feature complete, right? The kinds of requirements that we saw a year ago are different than they are now, and are guaranteed to be different a year from now. And so the kind of conversations that we're now having is to actually prove, customers are saying, can you actually prove that, the network is 100% fully decentralized? Can you prove that we can actually get fine-grained access controls around data and methods in this environment? How can you prove compliance and auditability? How do you do that in a cryptographic fashion? How do you do that at scale? How do you do that with performance? Right? And so we're starting to see a transition where the conversation is now specific to the business needs, very specific business needs, and less about, well, does blockchain work or does it not? And so over the next couple of years, what we're starting to see is a discussion around how do we actually, bring down these barriers to adoption, bring down the total cost of ownership from a technology, a business, and a policy perspective. And I think we need to do this hand in glove and kind of have a continued dialogue and a continued discussion, because we cannot have one conversation and ignore the others. Obviously, we're seeing needs around performance, scalability, security. How do you provide end-to-end trust in an interoperable fashion? As I mentioned earlier, we know there are going to be multiple blockchain technologies, multiple blockchain networks. That should not be an impediment to innovation. I think we should look at that and embrace that as, because we have diversity, we're actually going to be in an environment where we can actually create more value. And of course, the interesting trifecta that scale, performance, and security come together. As they come together, what does that mean from a technology perspective? How do we actually get there, right? And drive digital convergence in such a way where you can actually prove full decentralization. But the more interesting piece is, how do you drive automation of workflow orchestration, not just within an enterprise, but between enterprises. We know that today many business applications consume resources from multiple providers, multiple infrastructure providers, multiple data providers. How do we ensure end-to-end trust of that environment, complex environment? And so how do we make sure that we're actually building business-aware blockchain technologies? As an industry, I think this is the kind of challenge that we need to get ahead of. How do we ensure that the business policies, the internal corporate governance is aligned with the rules and regulations that are out there set by policymakers? And how do we do this in a real-time fashion, right? Not once a day or once a month or a quarter or once a year. How do we continually validate this? And so if I step back and I look at where the blockchain space is today, state of the art across the board, I would say, is you've got these blockchain nodes that exist. They're out there in the world. They're doing their thing. Some are mining. Some are doing proof of stake. Some are doing protocol-based consensus mechanisms. But at the end of the day, there are these nodes, and there's this model of decentralized applications that's operating on these nodes. But the challenge is that there's actually a wealth of technology that is almost being completely ignored, right? Fully separated from the underlying infrastructure itself. And so one of the models that we're pushing for is to start actually integrating some of this technology into the network, right? Get to a point where we can actually fully run complete blockchain infrastructures and think of it almost like IP. It's in the background, it's completely transparent, you never talk about it, but it's everywhere. And when you get there, now we can convert any network, any transaction, into a trusted transaction, any trusted environment. The network becomes the application, right? And this is the journey that we're on at Cisco, is how do we actually make this in such a way where blockchain becomes completely ubiquitous? It doesn't matter what blockchain technology you're running, but the underlying principles of cryptographic proof and trust are ubiquitous. So policy requirements are constantly evolving. We need to, one, get better involved in actually identifying what policies we might need to create. And we're super supportive of the work here at the Chamber to help educate and drive awareness of this. There are policies that we need to simply accept and adopt, right? And of course, we need to drive accountability around these policies. How do you measure accountability in a real-time and continuous fashion? And how do you do that in an environment where it's underpinned by infrastructure and data integrity, right? It's one thing to have policies being defined and actions being taken, but how do we actually instrument accountability and ensure efficacy of that accountability? So that's work that I think is uniquely suited in this environment. But I think from a U.S. perspective, I think we need to be looking at this more from a North American perspective as well. And of course, the call to action, the National Action Plan. Right? I was just talking to Perianne a couple of minutes ago, and I think one of the more compelling attributes of this is, how do we make this a document for the Western Hemisphere? Right? Canada, the US, Mexico, eventually South America. I mean, these are the markets that drive a significant amount of value creation in general. So how do we do this in a public-private partnership way with governments around the world? And of course, how do we build momentum around all of this? So part of my, I guess, late afternoon, evening job is I actually run an industry consortium called the Trusted IoT Alliance. And one of the things that we recognized in this space was, while there's a lot of innovation, there's a lot of innovation happening on the technology side at consensus layers and smart contracts and networks and IoT from the core to the edge. Where is the opportunity, right? Again, from a product perspective, in the Valley, we spend a lot of time worrying about product market fit, which is great. But are the buyers our classical buyers, right? This is a whole new technology that is creating entirely net new markets that we're forcing, and we're creating an impetus for regulators and policymakers to actually respond to. So how do we sell into that, right? So the new model needs to be product market sales fit, okay? Now, as we're going through this, so what we did is we created a design challenge series, and we partnered with a company called Mock Nation, who provides independent third-party audits and reviews of technology. And what we did was we created a design challenge series that says, here's a class of sponsors that have a certain business problem, a certain go-to-market problem, or a sales challenge. Some of these guys know what blockchain is, some of them don't. Yet there's a toolkit around distributed or decentralized trust that maybe there's a fit. And so how do we actually make this happen? How do we get these industries set up in such a way that they can actually readily adopt blockchain technology, get them trained, get them educated? And so the Design Challenge series is put in place to actually take a very simple use case where there is a technical challenge or a business challenge today, where there's already been some pre-work done that says if we could introduce blockchain in this use case, we can actually create an opportunity, create a market. And in going through this, what we're finding is that this is an easier sell than we thought. And so part of the journey, as we go through this, is we said, let's actually create 4 global challenges: smart mobility, smart construction, smart building, and smart logistics. Today, we have 2 of these underway, the smart mobility and the smart construction challenge. They're completely underway. These are global challenges. Anyone can participate. And one of the things that we're expecting and we're hoping for is that natural partnerships occur. Because our observation is that no one company has a complete end-to-end solution to address some of these simple challenges. And so we want to see that organic partnership happen. We want to see different components coming together to develop and deliver an end-to-end solution. And for the challenges, for the challengers, actually, the reward is for those who get selected, they do a pilot and POC with the sponsors, with the potential promise of going to a commercial production deployment. And so creating that environment, creating that sandbox is what we're hoping to leverage to accelerate commercial adoption. So the Smart Mobility Challenge, we have a Jaguar I-Pace that is being connected and outfitted with blockchain technology and will be driven all throughout Europe. Okay? Car ownership is a simple use case that people get. You know, in the blockchain space, we have a tendency of overcomplicating our use cases. So how do you do car ownership? Operations, the insurance, the purchase, maintenance, entirely on blockchain. How do you drive a vehicle between countries? And so the challenge that we've set up, and this was a hackathon that we did, we hosted with T-Labs from Deutsche Telekom 2 weeks ago in Barcelona. We're going to drive this car from Barcelona to Berlin. And what's interesting here is multiple jurisdictions are involved, right? It'll be the first design challenge ever done in the blockchain space where we're having to recognize and acknowledge the complexities of different jurisdictions for a very simple use case around car ownership. And we have a smart construction challenge also being kicked off. What's interesting here is that the opportunity that we're seeing is some of our sponsors are actually going to make available a construction site as part of the challenge itself. So the technology will actually be deployed in an active construction site, and we're going to see what the outcomes are. But to close, kind of like my opening, what I want to say is let's build out these industries, these ecosystems, these value networks, but keep the end in mind, right? To borrow from Wayne Gretzky, you know, let's skate to where the puck is going to be, right? Let's set that environment up. Let's actually work together, collaborate, drive innovation, drive co-development, create a partnering ethos where we're actually helping to drive scale from a business perspective. Thank you.